For a video companion to this podcast, as well as information regarding materials and equipment, log on to our YouTube.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 2 of Making Muppetland. This is a 5-part mini podcast series, or podcast mini series, I should say, on the making of the Dark Ride. And if you listen to episode 1, which I recommend you do before you listen to this one, you'll know that Nick, Brent, and I, albeit in separate locations at the moment, have worked together over the years on my arcade business. And growing up, Nick and I, during the school year, we went to school together. We were neighbors, or close enough. When you live in the suburbs, you were pretty much neighbors. And we would tinker in the garage. And we were just talking about before we started the episode, Nick, that we would make like puppets and like on like little wires, and they would be like like googly eye puppets with little like drop jaws, and we did like vegetable puppet and just silly stuff. And then Brent, when I would go to summer camp with you, I would get exposed to new stuff like plaster of Paris and
large puppets.
Latex, large puppets.
Large puppets.
You built an Audrey too. Yeah, Frumacera. So if you know the show Fiddler on the Roof, there's a Frumacera. Frumacera is a character. She's like the big monster, the town ogre, and Brent had built this. Brent had this massive Frumacera puppet. I took it home. And I loved puppets growing up, and my parents were not thrilled. It was this massive, and of course you built it out of lumber because that's what we had. There was no 3D printers.
The amount of times that your parents said, "Don't let him bring anything else home," is incredible. But you always found a way.
Every summer,
to their delight.
But that's what it was, and we were building puppets out of wood. There was times where, and we just build what you didn't know. And I will tell you that by the time I got to college, I interned at the Jim Henson Muppet, what they called the Muppet Mansion. It was the Muppet Workshop, but it was actually the mansion on the east side of Manhattan where Jim Henson worked before he passed. And so I had the privilege of actually working there where they were building the Sesame Street puppet. So I would walk down the basement every day where the Muppet Workshop was, and like Bert and Ernie are just sitting there on posts, no different than like we would throw something on a post now with a bag over his head, and you'd be like looking and be like, and because I always like kind of did the voices a little bit growing up, and it'd be like, you always just want to like be like, oh, what are you looking at, Bert? Like I always wanted to like stand there and just start, and you see like Grover hanging up, and you would see, I remember I walked in one day and Elmo was shooting a bit, and it was like Isaac Mizrahi and Elmo, and it was Kevin Clash was there, and I remember Isaac Mizrahi like broke the whole like vibe, or he like said something about all the puppets, and Elmo was like, you ruined the illusion. And it was just the magic of being in the place where Jim Henson created it all. So that always stayed with me. And I think, Brent, that's ultimately why when it came to picking a theme for this ride, Muppets prevailed, because you and I have this distinct passion for all things Jim Henson, and that's Labyrinth and Dark Crystal and Fraggle Rock. I don't know what, I guess I do know why, but I don't know. I'll pretend to not know why Disney can't get the Muppets right. And I kind of like to think that we got it right here in designing and building this ride. Once we knew it was going to be a Muppet experience, then involved, what is a Muppet experience? If you're going to design a ride where the Muppets are taking over Disneyland, like, first of all, who's in it, but then how do you make that a Muppet experience? And that's where like these little nuanced touches come about, whether it's Rizzo with mouse ears or Sam the Eagle at the top of the totem pole. That's the kind of stuff Jim Henson did best. The subversive parody of the Muppets. That's the part of it that's lost. And I don't know what you can say to that, but
it was very spontaneous, even though it was obviously well planned. It seemed spontaneous on the moment, and that's what made it even funnier. Especially from the Muppet Show and in the original Muppet Show's episodes, they had this great sense of not just comedic timing, but spontaneous chaos that was just fun and silly and just worked so well.
So when we decided to put, and you're going to have to help me out with this because albeit it was August, it seems like a lifetime ago. when we finally decided, okay, we're going to do the Muppets, did we just say like, oh, let's make some Kermits, let's make an animal? Or like, what was the process of getting to these are the characters we're going to use to try and tell a story?
I think it was originally, it was like, how long is this ride going to be? And how what do we accomplish within that ride in the section of scenes, because we still had to break each area down into a scene area. What's happening as you turn the corner here? What's happened when you go along the straight area along here? What happens when you turn the next corner? And we realized we had ourselves about 4 different areas, and eventually it became really 5 areas that we ended up by creating by the time we finished. Was the whole Space Mountain piece kind of was last minute. That happened only a week ago. Space Mountain going, hey, let's throw a arch up there and put a star field back there and a couple of Zerg targets and make a very quick tribute to Space Mountain. And that really was the last and the quickest thing that we threw together. And I think that also worked too. But in the process of what you were saying, it's like, yeah, I believe we figured out the scenes. Then from there, we broke down how many Muppets can we fit in each scene that would pull the story along to get you to the next scene as you turn that bend. What is happening in that next bend? Is it, and that's where we pulled in the Jack Skellington, and then we started making some skeleton teeth, and we're going, well, wait a minute, we still need a Muppet again. So it became, hey, let's put Rizzo up there. It's such a Rizzo thing to be in the sewers with the other, weird, spooky bits and pieces and stuff like that. So that's how that kind of came to.
But it's interesting because, and again, you're almost taking me through the whole thing for the first time, because when you don't know what you're doing truly, and it's not to say that we didn't know what we were doing, but we didn't know what we were doing. We knew the architecture of what we were doing. We knew what we were trying to tell, but we had never done this before. So when you say, hey, I'm going to build an animal, like, it's funny to me when you built that second animal, you built it in hours. And that first animal still didn't take you a long time to build.
Yeah, it took a day and a half. Yeah. About a day and a half, actually, yeah.
But it was the process of cracking, okay, so this is going to be a moving mouth. It's got to be somewhat a lightweight structure. Then I know that it's going to have repetitive motion. And then it's like one of the hard things still, even in the final video, is the movement in the Kermit mouth, right?
Yeah, so we're still going to be cleaning that up. There's stuff that we're learning, that we're figuring out, that we even talked about the day we were shooting, and it was like this new epiphany of, well, that didn't work, and that was a constant set of small failures. And I finally saw something on the day of shooting going, we have to try that next because, well, we want to improve on it. We want to be able to make it a little bit better. So we can give him a lot more mouth movement. Kermit, for those who don't know, his mouth is always constantly loud and wide.
We're doing like neck movement, head turns, mouth open and close. We're not even getting down into arms and lip movements and all that. I mean, we're still learning that stuff. But just at the base level of, we had all these conversations about the back of the mouth, where the back of the mouth meets, and how for certain characters you have sort of the back of the mouth comes to a point. So like Kermit's back of mouth comes to a point. But if you want to do something, I don't know why I'm thinking of like the aliens from Sesame Street with the yip yip jaws. But if you want to do something that's got more of like a scooped in mouth, you know what I mean? That's a different inner structure, which is essentially what the birds are, than if you want to do something like Kermit, which has that sort of restrictive point in the back, because now you've got to sort of pull that thing open. And if that's foam or rubber, now you might have the range of motion sitting there in the actual 3D printed animatronic, but then by the time you add all these layers inside, it's almost like you don't have enough range of motion now.
That's it. I mean, the reality is, you're not using the exact same motor frame and setup that you do for everything else. It really is different.
But we didn't even know that.
Things. We didn't know that, but we learned it. And the trick is then what makes it better. And then as for the birds, I started rechanging the design, that the beak was originally an additional piece that got added on. I eventually designed and created the beak of the little birds as part of the mainframe out of the 3D printed area, because it saved us a whole lot of hassle of having to make little tiny pieces when we could build them big enough to be the full beak and design it in its own little way.
And there really was no time to go back other than refining things on the fly. There was no really any time to go back because, you know, while you're over here doing that, maybe I was in the computer in After Effects trying to put together some slapdash, I won't call it animation, but, you know, sliding images around and keyframing them because that's all I had. And while I'm doing that, you're doing that. And then we kind of like reconvene and be like, well, what do you got? What do you got? Mm-hmm. And then you kind of go from there. And then you get to that point, like you said, where you're standing there and you're like, at the very, very last minute, we're looking at what we thought was going to be a Tron arch. And we're like, oh my gosh, that's Space Mountain. Yeah. Oh my gosh, we put a Starfield in. Oh my gosh, there's our Star Wars reference. Like you just let go and you trust, oh my God, I'll come back to that thing. And
that became an epiphany within a day, though. That something was there, and then it was built like about 2 days later, and we shot it the day after.
And again, I mean, we didn't even really fully showcase it just because of the nature of all the things that we have going on. But we've got like the pigs in the space thing flying up, and Nick, you know this best. Like when we did the Starfield and that tunnel and all that stuff, and we were trying to do, we had this idea at one point. This is going pre Muppetland. This is going back to the arcade days. We wanted to do like projection on a curved ceiling, and we didn't even know what we were in for. We put up this curved thing, and then we threw a projector up there, and we were like, oh, that's not right.
Yeah, we learned fast or learned slowly. I'm not sure which one it would be.
We learned very fast because I think we had to scrap an entire, what was the plan? It was like we wanted to use the laser.
Yeah, initially I think you wanted to use the laser. You wanted to use the laser because it has the ability to project a star field, and it's a laser, so it looks really sharp, really crisp, and really fine points of light. And we wanted that throughout the tunnel, and we thought, I mean, Brent even built and set up the platform that we were going to put the laser on above the tunnel at the roof of the warehouse. I mean,
we didn't have enough height of the roof.
Yeah, it was just like...
We didn't know that, though.
Again, we learned the hard way and real quickly had to say, okay, we need to change this. And, you know, my time out there was limited because I would come out for 2 weeks at a clip, and it's just like... How do we make this work? And we need to make it work quick. And like you said, I think last week, thank God for Amazon, because they could get stuff to us really quick and we can make it work and figure it out and just go from there. But that's anything production. That's production period. Whether you're doing a TV show, movie, commercial, theater, you have to have the ability to change and run on the fly, like run and gun, you know?
Well, that's it. Sorry, Royce. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's how you kept on telling me, you know, we can't treat this like we're trying to build a ride. You're going to treat it like we're going to build a small production. And you know, for anybody out there who wants to try and do their own thing, don't think about it as this one thing that you have to try to accomplish. Think about how would it look to present to somebody else? How do you want it to make somebody else feel? As a production piece, you want to produce something that's not just for yourself. You want to produce to show somebody else, to get them to feel excited about what you've created. If that makes sense.
No, it does. And I think, you know, what was interesting about that tunnel experience is we were like, again, way in over our head. We had this idea of projecting on the roof of a tunnel, of a curved tunnel. And we failed miserably. Mm-hmm. It was very humbling. I remember because Brent, you know, I talked about last episode, that fantastic rib cage thing you built. What I didn't say last episode was that we ultimately didn't need it because it didn't do what we needed it to do with the curvature and the projection, all the things we didn't account for. However, fast forward to Muppetland, and now we just go flat scrim. And all that curvature, projection stuff we didn't account for, that entire learning experience got put into the Mickey because we built this Mickey with a 3D head that was animated, which was inspired by Runaway Railway. But we had that conversation back then about projection and curvature that went on. That's probably a 2-year conversation from the time you and I went to Disneyland and stared at the Buzz Lightyear and said, well, how distorted does this image have to be at its source before it lands perfectly on the face? You know what I'm talking about? The Buzz Lightyear that greets you in the queue.
Yeah.
And so the point is that miserable failure then becomes two separate successes in knowing, no, you project flat on a scrim. Don't even waste your time trying to put a scrim up on a curve like that. It's not going to do what we think it's going to do. However, take that technique, put it over here. And then what did you do with the plexi dome? Did you spray paint the back of it? How do you make it?
Oh, the Mickey Mouse dome. Yeah. I mean, that again, the one thing about stuff that I see on video, is that there's always a different aspect of when you're seeing something in real life too. It looks even more cooler in real life. So you can see this thing on a video and it looks kind of flat and whatever, but there really is an amazing depth that you really don't necessarily capture on film. But yeah, it's a complete full 8-inch dome, half dome, I should say. It is spray painted just with white matte spray paint on the inside. Not heavily, just enough that a projector light can shine through it. And then, it's just lining up the projector, bouncing it off of a mirror. And I think we have video footage somewhere of how it looks bouncing off the mirror and then actually working off, from there, projecting on the dome itself. So.
And again, another series of what ifs and just kind of jumping off the ledge because we didn't know how it was going to look. We knew what wasn't going to work. And then we just start trying stuff. And even when we were developing the ride vehicle itself, and I would have conversations with Nick, we would like make reference to like train wheels or roller coaster wheel fittings and all these different setups. Brent, we would just try stuff. If you and I didn't agree on something, we would just go, all right, we'll try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Then we'll try the next one. So sometimes it didn't even warrant a conversation. So just try it.
Yeah.
What's the worst that's going to happen? The hardest part for me when we first started coming up with the ride was the first hard thing for me was getting a vehicle to move. And that's where, Nick, I was talking to you about like wheelchair motors and this, that, and the other, and looking up YouTube videos and seeing what other folks had done. And then how do you control this thing? And the PWM and stuff that I still barely understand, but you just run with it. And that's, again, to bring it back to the pencil sketches we talked about last time. Nick would start going, well, what if you try this? And I went in one day, and Brent, you were there, and I had finally gotten the batteries, and I had gotten the motor, and I had just gotten everything together, and it was like, let's see if this works. And as soon as those wheels started spinning, I knew we could build a ride. But at that point, there was no track, there was no walls. It was just, if I can get these batteries and that potentiometer to control the variable speed of that motor, we might be able to build a ride. And that was like the whole and then that was it. And I don't remember, honestly, Nick, where I really pulled you in beyond that, because I remember saying to you, I've always wanted to, I've been saying to you since we were kids, I want to build a ride. But the idea that we could piggyback off of all the DMX, conceptually anyway, all the DMX programming knowledge that we had, take on a new application. Yeah, go ahead.
So for all those out there that may be listening that may not know some of this complex language you're talking of, DMXs and this and that, maybe you want to explain a little bit, break down what it more or less says. Is it worth it?
Yeah, that's fair. I'll let Nick explain that, because really what I was going to say anyway, and I'll let you run with it, Nick, is knowing one protocol doesn't necessarily mean you're going to know how to use the next protocol, and then trying to get all these different things talking to each other. I mean, I texted the other day at random, I go, this programming stuff never ends.
No.
So what do you, speak to that? Because first of all, explain DMX, but then please speak to the value of knowing what application to use when, and then how we kind of got where we got with this.
Yeah, DMX is basically a language or protocol, basically, and it kind of got pulled into the lighting industry or production world. I don't know all the history, so forgive me for that. We could Google it, but there's no point in that. Let's just talk about how it works, because that's what we're talking about. But basically, DMX is a bunch of signals from 0 to 255, and there's receivers that take that information, and And 0 could be the motor running at 0, basically off. 255 could be the motor at full throttle, and anywhere in between is like a step to make it go faster. But it's also the same thing with the light. So if you have a light bulb, 0 could mean off, and 255 could mean that light bulb's at 100%. And you say, well, why not just make it 0 to 100? Well, kind of like more is better. It just gives you that much more control and fine tuning, and it can even go even finer and finer. There's other ways to split 255 into even more minute things, but that's usually in the actual light or the fixture itself, their hardware and their interpretation of it. I think to bring DMX back into this conversation, as Royce would often ask me, hey, can we use DMX to control a motor? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, how? Well, we could take a 12-volt DMX dimmer, which basically takes DMX and turns it into 12 volts of electricity. Again, it can range it from off to that 255 step, and you connect that motor to the polarity of the DMX dimmer, and then as you control the fader on your lighting console or whatever you're doing, it's moving this motor. And it's just infinite. Royce the other day is, hey, can we control a fan through DMX? And I'm like, sure, there's tons of different ways. You can either put it into a regular relay and it's on off, or we could get a DC mode. Like, it's just a protocol, really. But again, it's really been taken over by the production industry, the lighting world, and it's all kind of like what you want to put on the other end of that, what you want to receive that DMX information and how you want it to react to it, if that all makes sense.
But it does, but at least to me, but I know
to me too, it's just like
but you just to make the distinction, you talk about 0 to 255. That is basically, let's just call that the spectrum of data. Is that fair to say? Because that's not the channels. The channels is 512 channels.
Right, and that's what I was going to say too, where you have this little 0 to 255 per channel, and you can have ultimately an infinite number of channels, but they have universes. It's all about also like bandwidth and capacity.
Right.
So like what Royce was saying, as far as 512 channels, they call that a universe. You know, if you're watching a modern arena concert, you're looking at thousands of channels of DMX, and within each one of those thousands of channels is all those little steps along the way.
But really, you're looking at universes is really what you're looking at.
Yeah, but again, there's just so much there. And nowadays with Cat 5, you now can put DMX over Cat 5, which then can squish so much more data, and it expands your bandwidth. But it's anything. As technology advances, it just gets better and better and easier to get from point A to point B. And you can get a heck of a lot more from point A to point B. And control it however you want in a way. And the neat thing about a lot of times DMX is the software we've been using, at least we used in the arcade. It could take protocol and other softwares outside of it. It can take that information, interpret it, and then make it control DMX. So a quick example would be MIDI, MIDI, which is a musical type of interface or protocol. So you could have a MIDI keyboard, which looks like a piano, and if you want to push this, middle C, for instance, the middle C is then sent out to the computer via MIDI. The computer then takes that MIDI signal, turns it into DMX, or interprets that MIDI signal and says, this DMX thing then goes on, and then literally by pushing this button, you can make a fog machine go off 1,000 feet away. So it's like
as long as you have the DMX to XLR adapter, because if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to make it all work. And that's where that's like, go ahead, Brent.
So in layman's terms for us basics and
thank you,
the children out there, it is allowing the computer to talk to your object through the process of it going from A to B through the project.
And the way I ended the last episode, those are your zeros and ones to bring it back to that, because it's basically a data pulse. So what happens is I'm sitting down there programming the lights for Muppetland, and I've got this light over here that's got a rotating head. So now that motor, every every access point, much like the animatronics on that motor, every access point requires a channel. Okay, so I've got to get the manual out now, and I'm like, where's the manual? Okay, and so always keep your manual, but then I've got to read, oh, I'm in 16 channel mode. So now I've got to go into my program and I've got to assign, and Nick can speak to this better than me, but I've got to assign every single channel to an input function. And then let's say that light's got however many channels. Some of them only had 4. So now suddenly that 512 that sounded like more than enough channels is all eaten up. Yeah. And then I go to add a light, and I'm like looking at my list, because you have to write it all down. And I go, where do I have a hole? Oh, channel 100 to 120 is open. You know what I mean? And I thought 512 channels was a lot, and it's not, because every single light is going to eat up a different amount. So then you get to motors. And that's the zero, again, to bring it back to the zero as well. It's pulse, right? So you're just much like you send a light a signal to do something, or an element of a light to do a signal, you send the motor a pulse. And we're using...
You're referring to the animatronic motor, correct?
Yes, thank you. I'm talking about the servo motors. But the same way that you would control the motor on that moving light, you're now sending it a pulse. So we've got these boxes that split out of the main box that does all the DMX lighting. And it kind of uses a Cat5 cable to talk to the secondary box. That box has 16 channels for servos, and that box will take a power supply. So I send into it, in the case of what we're doing, a 5-volt power supply. Okay. So I've got all my lighting running over here, and now I've got these boxes sort of daisy chained out for the motors. So in the case of Muppetland, we're using 2 what they call Pro IOs, is the Vagal Pro IOs. We're using the PHX Pro Commander. You can look all this stuff up. It's spelled WEIGL, I believe. So we're using this Pro Commander hub to run the lighting, and then through Cat5, it will control the ancillary boxes. So I've got 2 ancillary boxes called Pro IOs. Each one does 16 channels. Then I've got a third box, and that runs video files only. So you can imagine, and Brent, one of the things we haven't even said in all of this is we're working in a very tight space. We don't even have the distance to put your arms out on this ride like you would. Like, we always talk about, like, oh, somebody can reach out and touch it. You're like, well, in the warehouse, we don't have a choice.
You literally could, yeah. But again, this is experimentation, so you learn with what the spaces you got to work with too.
Yeah. But the point is that we've got these boxes everywhere, because you've got the tiki birds are taking up how many motor channels, the lights are everywhere. Nick mentioned the fog machine. I've got the fog machine as like the last thing in the sequence. And then right before we start shooting, the fog machine is having, you can say it's shorting out, and it was, but not to a detriment where it's going to damage it. It was just like wigging out. But short, even in the arcade era of my business, is a term we use a lot for any time that 0 is essentially turning to a 1. Anytime you're closing something when you don't want to close it, and it's starting to talk or chatter, that's right. Nick, is that wrong to categorize?
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I was actually trying to find some of our drawings, our pencil sketches, just to kind of show. But at some point, we'll find them and we'll put them in the show. I know we're going to talk about adding other images, but like it definitely helps you literally visually see what's going on, because it's just really just a matter of getting everything to talk to one another, and it works. And basically that's life. If you get people to talk to one another and be able to communicate well, life is going to usually work out pretty well. It's just when that communication fails, things don't always go the way you want it to. So that's kind of what we're talking about here, how things communicate, connect, and there's so many different protocols and ways to do it. It's just a matter of figuring out what works best, what you personally know, and it's also, of course, a budgeting issue. There's a lot of protocols that are less expensive than others, and there's a lot of hardware that's less expensive than others, and it's trying to manage all of that.
Well, and look, that was one of the weird things. I don't want to call it the silver lining, but the weird thing of going through this process, because of the pandemic, we were sitting on stuff. So this box that I had bought to do a lighting show in what was going to be an arcade esports arena. And I mean, well, let's talk about this for a second. You were going to walk into this place, and there was going to be like an animatronic monkey, and then there were going to be these like freestanding kiosks, and everything was going to be heavily lit, and then the walls were going to have these LED panels, and we were going to use a target-based system at some point, so you'd be able to interact and change wall panels. It was
plus your monorail piece up the top,
the monorail piece, which Nick talked about, I think, on the last episode, which was like like the conveyor system you'd see in the dry cleaner, something out of Droid Factory. Like, we were really theme parking this place.
Yeah.
And the ride was a joke. I always joke about the ride. I think some of our friends even were like, "Oh, you'll put the log flume over there." Ha ha ha. And now I'm like, well, as soon as Nick moves to LA, we'll build a log flume, because now it's just a matter of what parts. But that's what was really exciting, because the lighting stuff gave me the confidence to go, okay, we were using a program, Nick, called Light Jams. Which takes, different like wave pulses, sine pulses. It'll take an input from something, but generally speaking, it's kind of loop based or pulse based, right? It's not linear like a timeline is, like we're using on the show software now called Showforge.
Yeah.
And I would always say to Nick, I want to do this, and he's like, well, that's a show. You can't really do a show here. It's not linear. And I didn't even kind of get the limits of that at that point. So what's cool with what we're using now is we're using a linear-based software. So taking the confidence of all the DMX lighting stuff we had done, using the skills Brent had developed with 3D printing, and now we know that we can make things move. It was like, if we could just make all these things talk in synchronicity, we've got a ride. And that was really the and I guess, again, not having a business and having all the parts at our disposal, despite being on a budget at Brent, we have a lot of stuff in that warehouse. It looks like to a lot of people like we did a lot of shopping, but that stuff was all sitting there.
Yeah.
And it was always a personal challenge to pull it off. And now it's going to turn into a business, because we're going to refine these rides, take what, our prototypical ride vehicles, prototypical wall structures, and re-envision them for the real world. That's going to be a whole nother learning experience.
Well, yeah, in the sense of the design, we're talking about it now, but it's like we want to do all of our walls modular so that they can easily just link together, be set up, and be considered a temporary wall in place around the surrounding area that's part of the atmosphere that you'll be going through. So that way you can change the shape of the track. You can change the shape of your walls. If you want to redesign it 6 months later, we can reskin the faces and the creatures and puppetry over the top of the motors and change it out. So the idea is to give not just one experience, but say at Christmas time or Halloween time, be able to reskin and repurpose something with the very quick and easy switch around, and everything's all sitting there, or your motors are still sitting there, or the animatronics are still sitting there, but refacing something, whether it be the set or the characters.
But that's something Disney does. I mean, if you go to this, you look at Splash Mountain. I mean, that's using animatronics from, I think, was America Sings. So even Disney does that, and I think what's cool about the Muppetland, the design experience was, again. And I kind of said this earlier with you about the Kermits, you're kind of running on your track and I'm running on my track. There was really no benefit of, let's have a meeting about this. How are we going to do that? It was kind of like, well, you do the part I'll do the part I know, and we'll kind of plug it together.
Yeah, we periodically had to re-meet again back in the center and go, right, well, is this going to work with that? And it's like, yeah, well, I need to change something just a little bit here, or we need you to change a little bit something there because it has to fit in certain parameters. We know that, for example, a motor is going to be only a certain size. You need to be able to make sure that it's the right size for what you need it to be for when you build something.
Yeah. And we'll talk in future episodes about other aspects of it, because one of the things that comes to mind there is projection mapping. And even mapping is an overstated term, because we're not doing a terrible amount of mapping there on that show. We've done more mapping in test scenarios.
Yes.
a little bit of mapping, but the idea that you're using After Effects and not some off-the-shelf software, I mean, it really does set you back a few paces. The off-the-shelf stuff, once you learn how to use it, and Nick, you and I have been talking about this for a long time too. It's, I would be like, oh, I tried this software, Mad Mapper or Maluminant or whatever it is, and it's all good, but it all can only do as much as you give it. And what I liked about After Effects is it's raw. You have a guy like Brent and a guy like Nick. Now you can literally make anything because After Effects starts with a blank page, and that can normally be intimidating, but it's kind of liberating. And again, we'll talk more in depth about the technical limitations, but I mean, who I don't know. I mean, how much projection work have you done, Nick, where you've actually had the ability to control like what you're feeding the projector? I got to imagine that's got a new territory.
Oh yeah. I mean, most of the lighting work I've done is just traditional lighting, whether it be regular moving heads, pars, fog, strobe, lasers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As far as projection goes, I mean, that's just the way now that the industry as a whole is going, because, they're able to realize once you start doing that, you can make you literally can make anything. So, you were talking about earlier in the show, like trying to figure out how they did the car. Or I know when we were in Disney, we were talking about the Cars ride. Like, is that projection to make the cars, the vehicles, the eyes move and things like that? But again, you put anything on a wall, you can project anything onto it and make it be that. And that's just kind of, I think, where the future that's where it's going. And you guys are out there physically doing it, and I'm out here kind of remotely doing it, throwing it at. It's just what it is. And yeah, it gives you unlimited possibilities. I mean, literally, and like Brent, like you were saying, with the mobility or the flexibility of the segments and the parts and pieces of the ride, like one day we could make it a under the sea type of submarine ride. Tomorrow we could make it a space ride. Then the next day through a jungle, and the next day through a soup factory. Like, I don't know.
You quite almost literally named what Royce and I were talking about with the TV monitors on the side at the beginning, because the original thing was an underwater experience kind of thing, and then that
Jurassic Park.
Yeah, with the giant swimming creature and dinosaur or whatever, and so that bounced around to being several different things, but we can change it back is what we can do now,
or build another. I mean,
I'm just saying, but the way the layout of where there's, say, the TV monitors or the projector is, allows us to just simply change the output of what is on that, what's filmed on that as the image.
And I think what was kind of cool too is, again, the train left the station, another pun not intended, but the train left the station before we ever really knew what we were doing. So by the time we actually came up with this Muppetland concept and applying it to everything, we had learned so much. So we had kind of developed all these little techniques, but we hadn't really tied them all together. Then you start tying them together and you realize what works, what doesn't work, and you start refining. I know, like, one of the last things we did, we was like, oh, we need a piece of moving brick. Like, you still see enough Kermit there. Like, it's just what it is. We only have this much motor span. And then it was like, well, let's just use the Sam the Eagle mouth technique. Like, you come to the point of a shorthand that didn't exist weeks ago, but I'm like, we'll just do it the way you did Sam's mouth.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have, right. Well, so it's like it's the servo perpendicular to the mouth and the horn kind of grabbing it up and down. But my point is that you develop this shorthand, and which is in turn really just confidence, because the first time you do it, you're uncertain. And then by the second or third time, there's a name for it. And that was sort of the whole experience of, I've got these boxes, they're supposed to do lights and they're supposed to do motors, but what if they could make a ride? And we're not actually controlling the ride motor from the show software. We're using a servo motor to punch a button that activates the motor. So, you're using these techniques that you would look at and you would go, is that the right way? And you realize, well, that's not a matter of, is it the right way? It's a matter of, does it work? Is it sustainable? It's not, I mean, Nick, we talk about this all the time. It's like, it doesn't really matter how they're doing it. It's how they're doing it.
Yeah. It's going to work for now. Yep.
Yeah. And it looks good from the front, right?
Well, it's interesting. I was watching something on television the other day, and they were talking about production and just, how you make stuff. And basically, like, they're talking about movies and TV shows as magic. And basically what they talk about movie magic. And what we're all making is literally magic. The point of magic is to put on a show, to do something so the people watching it believe that it is real and it is actually happening. And that's what we're doing. We literally are
creating an illusion.
Yeah, we're putting on a magic show, and we want people to look at that and say, wow, that's amazing. Well, even though they will know it's not real, they will want to believe it's real, and also kind of I wonder how they're doing that. And that is like, once getting to that point and being able to have people say, wow, that's awesome, I wonder how they're doing that, kind of means like, yes, we're making magic. It's working because people either are believing it and want to know how it's happening and see that behind the scenes, which is what which is what got us here, because we bought into the magic and we believe it, and then we want to know more about that magic, and it's so intriguing to us. We decided to make that magic as well.
That goes all the way back to your childhood, though. As a child, you literally. I remember when I was a kid, I was 10 years old. I saw the making of The Empire Strikes Back, and it was like, it showed you the behind the scenes of how they created Cloud City and the sets and all that. And I was like, that's so cool. I was already an artistic kid at the time. I didn't know how to channel that energy, but that magic of filmmaking was what drove me towards that direction. Other people are going to find a different point of view, whether it's music or different sort of art form or whatever it may be in their lives, but they're always going to find something that they're going to find is a magical piece of their youth that they want to learn how to create, and then further go on and expand it and teach people down the track when they get older. So
I would watch the making of the Return of the Jedi video ad nauseum, and there were two very mystifying elements to that to me. One of them was Cy Snoodles, because she was being run by like a piece of
she was a marionette puppet
line or something, yeah. But she's on like a piece of plywood raked up like on a sawhorse or something. The
operator is about 20 feet above her, moving her.
And then the other thing was Jabba the Hutt, and you have like 9 little people inside Jabba the Hutt, and you realize that like it takes 9 people to run this puppet and bring him to life, and they are in concert with each other. And that brings it back to the programming of it all. And that's the inspiration. I mean, Brent, when you and I were doing one of the TikTok videos we decided to do like a little Muppet sketch in the beginning. Yeah. Do you remember that? And we were doing like Gonzo falling off the ladder, and we were giggling as we were doing it because it just looked funny as we were filming it. Yeah, and I was like, I turned to him, I go, this must be like what like Frank and Jim were dealing with, because you're just watching it happen and you're laughing to yourself and it becomes infectious. That goes back to what I said in the last episode, the first episode of this little mini series we're doing. The idea of choosing the Muppets was to keep at least for me, was to keep me inspired. We were building this fantastic other arcade experience. This place, it got wiped out from under us. I barely was going into the shop. Brent, you were going in, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to go in today. And then this was the thing that kind of lit the fire under me. And I thought the Muppets was kind of a fun theme because of our mutual affection for them. But, it's kind of fitting, right? I mean, everything, at least in my connection to both of you, has a puppet. Like everything. Like Nick and I were making puppets in the garage growing up. You know what I mean? And you were teaching me how to make molds at camp that looked like then I'd run off into my garage and do something that, try to make something like the Fiery Gang out of Labyrinth because I knew how to use liquid latex,
Yeah, you were then like Brent taught you Royce, and then Royce would come back from camp and teach me, and you were making stuff. It was crazy.
There was this poor neighborhood kid. I don't know, Brent, if you even know this story, but at one point, you and a couple other friends of ours at camp had made like a chest that somebody ripped into, like a latex chest for like a horror movie.
Yes.
And I told Nick about it, and I was like, we could make a plaster cast of someone's chest, and we tried to do it. Now we're in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, in the freezing cold dead of winter, and we get this kid Joe down the street into my garage, and I'm laying him on the cold concrete floor, and we're pouring plaster of Paris on him.
Too well.
Yeah, he was a really good sport. But we were always. I mean, I'm sure our parents thought we were weird, but we were always kind of daring to do. Yeah, but it was the movie magic. I mean, it was always how.
No, I was going to say when I was 16, I was the same way. I was in high school. I was, I'd been given this 8mm film to go shoot something and play with in media class. I shot this little film, and I literally got fishing line on a spaceship, went down to the beach in the sand dunes and shot a spaceship flying over the top of the sand dunes and just followed it with a camera. Your camera doesn't pick up the fishing line in that particular shot. It looks pretty amazing, and you get back something, and you're really proud of what you do and experiment with. And it's all experimentation. That's it. You can, if anything else, just to learn the process and trial by error and experimenting with this stuff, and not thinking of anything as a failure, but how can I make this better? How can I succeed with something more creative? And what else is out there that I can use to work with?
You remind me when you said the fishing line. When Nick and I were kids, we would take like speeder bikes and stuff, put them on fishing line and shoot them in front of the camera. And I had this room in my house that, as nutty as a kid as I was, I convinced my parents to let me put up a giant blue screen. It was a blue sheet. I didn't know enough to use something that would play with light correctly, let alone to light it correctly.
Was it blue or green? I always thought it was green.
It was blue, but this is where I was going with it. I bought halogen. I mean, I was a kid. I bought halogen lights from Home Depot, which then made the blue a green because the color temperature of the halogen lights. So it was very hard to chroma key. So I think the best you could do was put on like a bright orange shirt. But if we were playing with toys and stuff, then it was just like the murky blue swamp or whatever. But my point was we were doing all the same things. And that's kind of like, I don't know. I guess that's where it starts. And it's, I can't imagine being a kid today where like you have a 3D printer at home, or you could
that's
anyway.
It. The technology is making it easier, whether it's something that comes as an addition to your camera, to your phone, whatever it may be. The technologies are getting simpler to work with, and to do this, it just becomes, what is your creative output to making something that's really cool to play with and show people. The technologies are getting easier to work with. Yeah.
Well, look, and I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode, because what I want to do is answer questions and talk more about technique as we keep going here. I know people are into it and they want to understand how they can do it. And if there's a way we can inspire people to just try it at home, whether it's with fishing line or 3D printing your own animatronic, I mean, that's what I think is really cool. Nowadays, everybody has a term for everything, right? So nowadays they call it STEAM and STEM. We used to just call it tinkering in the garage. You know what I mean? We just called it tinkering in the garage. Oh, I found this old thing. I'm going to take it apart and put it back together. So, and for those that don't know, STEAM and STEM is science, technology, engineering, math, arts. It's all those things. So that's really what I'm hoping this experience of building this ride, going back into a business, opening this up to the public, unless everybody calls Disney 100 times over, it's not going to be Muppetland, but it's going to be our own thing. And what's exciting is we've learned a lot. So imagine where we'll go from here. And we're not even really done. I mean, yeah, for all intent and purpose, Muppetland is done, but we're going to keep working on it because it's not the ride experience so much as perfecting our understanding of these techniques. So like, follow, subscribe, please ask us questions in the comments below.
Yep. Yeah. And if you want to see artistically how we, put something together, or whether we glue it, or whether we sew it, or how we want to do it, and you're interested in how something might go together, let us know. The 3D printing stuff, we would love to show you a little bit more detail, maybe on the design process. If you're interested there, we could show a little bit of that, or anything else from there. Yeah.
Cool. Well, guys, thank you again. Appreciate everything. It's been an interesting experience. I hope that people find this interesting because, look, like I said, we're just getting started here. So thank you both. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe, share it with a friend, and maybe call Disney while you're at it. Tell Disney you want to see Muppetland coming to one of the parks or something. I mean, I wish they would just open the parks, Brent, so we could go back with this renewed understanding of all this stuff. I wish you were here too, Nick, but you're not. But don't you feel like now, and just the time that Disney's been closed, it would be a new experience? Even from the time that I just went to Disney World months ago, it would be a new experience learning what we have learned to walk in now and look at things and go, can we do that?
What did we miss the first time round? That's the cool thing about going back to Disneyland now. I get the chance, especially with the mind of putting a ride together. You're sitting there, you look at something, but then you never look at it the same way again because you're always looking for something different that you never noticed before, that you try to understand or want to understand.
Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate you guys both, and we'll see you next week.